Good morning and welcome to worship. I'm Pastor Nick, and as always, it is so good to be with all of you. Welcome Cahill, welcome Grace, and welcome anyone who may be joining us for the first time. If that's the case, we're so happy to have you. We're still doing online worship, and we just want to make sure that you feel welcome. No matter where you are, no matter who you are, we're so happy that you've chosen us to be your place of worship. Alrighty, and so what we're doing right now is we're kind of in the middle of a longer series where we're listening to the testimonies of the members of our faith community kind of every other week. But what we're doing in the weeks that are in between is we're going to be looking at various topics that have to do with testimonies and speaking in community and all of those things. And so our topic this week is we're going to be looking at the idea of stories and what stories mean to us and why we tell them, why we use them, and how much I appreciate them. And so one of the things that you can kind of bank on is if you show up to a Christian church on December 24th and you attend a Christmas Eve service, you are probably going to hear the story of the birth of Jesus Christ. In fact, I hope so. If you attend a Christian church on Christmas Eve that doesn't mention the birth of Jesus, you probably didn't go to the right place, and you probably didn't get what you were looking for. And so I love that, though. I love the idea that you're probably going to hear a certain story, and it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to do that because maybe you have a pastor or a preacher or a speaker who might show a different angle to the story, might offer a unique perspective, but overall, most of us probably know where the story is going and how it's going to line up. Same thing on Easter. If you show up to a Christian church on Easter Sunday, you will most likely hear a story about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I hope that you do. And so the idea of stories and storytelling is something that is crucial to our Christian faith. Stories that are scripture, they've been passed down for thousands of years, and in large measure how we continue to pass on the way God has interacted with humanity. It's a huge piece of that. And what's also kind of unique about stories is we never stop liking them. So, a lot of us grew up in a place where we probably heard bedtime stories, or maybe we attended a school and our teacher would share a story with us, gets the imagination going, maybe we can put ourselves in that story, and it's an easy way to connect with the material. Well, that is very much true then, it's very much true now, and kind of the secret is, even as adults, we still enjoy hearing these stories. And so that's one reason why I'm extremely excited about the series that we're in, where we're getting the chance to hear various testimonies from people of our faith community. Not because of any crazy reason necessarily, but because it's awesome to see the way people in our faith community have interacted with Christ and the way Jesus has impacted their lives. I love hearing those stories, and I look forward to it. And so this is an exciting series for all of us. And not to hammer in or emphasize the point too much about why stories are so important, but I can't help but remember recently, within the last year, Cahill and Grace for this first one, we had a campfire fireside chat series, and I love that concept because we were just hanging out and sharing some informal stories and talking about the gospel. And then even before I was appointed to Grace and I was pastoring Cahill exclusively, we had this children's series where some of our kids, we would record them talking about the stories of the Bible, and we let them share what happened, and that was probably my favorite series that we've done because it's so much fun to gather these stories. And so, kind of in the spirit of that, what I wanted to do today is I'm going to share with all of you the story that sticks out to me as kind of the first story that I retained as a child. And so I grew up in a church. I grew up going to Acton United Methodist Church, and I would attend Sunday school nearly every week. And so I would hear the stories, but the oldest story that I remember retaining is probably not one that you would expect, but kind of the story that stuck with me first is the story of Zacchaeus and the sycamore tree. Maybe you've heard it, and I'm definitely gonna tell it in a second. And I don't know why that was the story that stuck with me. Maybe it's because they sing that song, Zacchaeus was a wee little... I'm not going to sing that song or the rest of it. Absolutely not. But it's very catchy, and I remember that. Or maybe it was because I loved climbing trees. And so if you ever get a chance to speak with my dear sweet mother, she will tell you I was a climber as a child. I would climb my way up. You walk into a room in a house, and there's, two, panels that go by. Just you walk into a room and you can, as a kid, you can kind of climb your way up. I used to do that. I used to do that and even climb on the garage door and all those different things. I used to be a climber. And so whenever I heard the story of Zacchaeus, it was like, yes, that's my guy. He climbs too. And so maybe that's why it stuck with me. But it's undeniable. Whenever I have distinct memories of growing up and preparing to climb a tree and thinking about Zacchaeus. True story. I for a long time I would think about Zacchaeus climbing a tree. So I don't know who my Sunday school teacher was in the mid-90s at Acton UMC, but whoever you are, great job, because it stuck. I loved it and I remember it. But I want to talk about that today in this series of sharing stories and testimonies and talking about ways Christ has impacted our lives. I want to share that because it really is that first Bible story that really stuck with me. And so, I'm just going to tell you the story. It takes place in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. And so what happens here is Jesus is walking to Jerusalem. This story happens kind of in the middle of this larger story of Jesus traveling to Jerusalem. He's on his way to Jerusalem, and then Luke chapter 19 picks up where he's going through Jericho to get to Jerusalem. And as he's going into Jericho, we get introduced to this guy named Zacchaeus. And we don't know much about Zacchaeus. We don't know his life story necessarily. We know a couple things. We know he is short. A wee little man was he. So we know that about Zacchaeus, and we know that he was a chief tax collector. And so what that means is a lot of people did not like him, safe to say. So tax collectors were notorious for being the people who would knock on your door and take your money. And there wasn't a whole lot of checks and balances back then, so a tax collector could easily show up to your house, knock on the door and say, hey, you owe this much. And you would have to pay it. There'd be no way to prove if they were lying or not. You just have to pay whatever number he thought of. And so, tax collectors had terrible reputations for that. And when it talks about him being wealthy, that's also another thing we know. We know that he was wealthy. When it talks about that, we can infer that he probably got that wealth from cheating people out of their money. It was just a common thing that tax collectors did. And so Jesus is walking through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem, and Zacchaeus, just enamored by the presence of Christ, he makes a game plan. There's this big crowd, and he realizes quickly he's not going to get through that crowd. He's not going to be able to see Jesus. And so he takes off running. Right? It says he ran ahead. He takes off running, gets past the crowd, finds a sycamore tree to climb so that he can see, and he does that. Now, side note, sycamore trees are incredible for climbing from one climber to the next. Great choice. You can't knock Zacchaeus on climbing that tree. Excellent choice. Strong branches, but he climbs up. And it's kind of this funny moment. I mean, it's kind of hard not to laugh. Jesus is walking through, and he stops, and he looks up, and he sees Zacchaeus just hanging out in this tree. And, oh goodness, he says, Zacchaeus, hurry down, for I must stay at your house today. And we kind of get a pause in this story here. We kind of get a pause because the writer of this story, Luke, takes this moment to bring us out of the story and kind of give us the feel of the crowd, if you will. And so at that point, Luke tells us that all who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." And so I think that specific verse/detail is very important. It kind of gives us the feel of the crowd during all of this. And I kind of wish there was more about that. But he just throws in this line that says, "And the crowd grumbled because there Jesus goes hanging out with sinners again." And you kind of have to wonder, like, were they just not paying attention for the majority of the message and ministry that Jesus had taught so far? I mean, yes, Jesus goes and hangs out with sinners. I don't know why they grumbled at that point, because looking at this story, this is pretty far along in the narrative of Jesus. In fact, we celebrate Palm Sunday every year on Jesus' triumphal entering into Jerusalem. That happens pretty much right after this. Jesus teaches the crowd one more time, and then he's entering Jerusalem. This is late in the game, and I guess what Jesus was saying didn't stick to everybody, but either way, they grumbled. And then they go back to having this conversation between the two of them. And so Zacchaeus looks at Jesus and pretty much says, "Look, I will give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount." And of course, Jesus, probably delighted to hear that, responds, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." All right, and so that dialogue is crucial. What's happening between Jesus and Zacchaeus is really important, and I think it's also very intentional. And so you've probably heard me say this before if you've listened to me preach, but context in the midst of Scripture is crucial. Context helps us understand so much of what's going on. And so just looking at what Zacchaeus said, Zacchaeus uses the amount 4 times as much, I believe, very intentionally. And so we can assume that Zacchaeus is probably familiar with Jewish laws. Is probably familiar with Exodus chapter 22, maybe. And so whenever we think back to Exodus 22, we get kind of a list of rules or laws regarding the restoration of something. And so within those laws of restoration, you get examples of, if this is stolen or whatever, you have to pay back double and all that. But within those laws, we find that really the only time someone is expected to pay 4 to 5 times the amount of what they owe or what happened is whenever something is destroyed. Whenever something is slaughtered, I believe they use sheep and oxen as an example, but whenever something is slaughtered or destroyed, that's whenever someone is expected to pay 4 to 5 times the amount. Now, I don't think it's an accident that Zacchaeus uses that number. I mean, it would have been easy to say, I'm going to sell half my possessions and I'm going to give so much money. But no, he says, I'm going to give 4 times the amount. And surely in that area, that amount would have triggered that memory of, okay, might be what he's talking about. And so I think there's a lot of symbolism going on here, because whenever you think of this story, Zacchaeus is very much trying to distance himself from the person he was prior to this encounter. You can tell he is at Jesus' feet saying, I'm going to change. I'm so sorry. This is how I've been acting. And he is quite literally offering to pay the amount for something that would have restored a thing that was destroyed and slaughtered. He is, I think, comparing himself to that, saying that this thing that I was, that's not me. That is destroyed. That is gone. I'm going to make up for that. I'm going to be something completely new, something that I wasn't at all before. I'm going to follow you, Christ, and distance myself from that thing altogether. I think it's huge what he's saying right now. He's willing to pay whatever it costs to get that piece of his life out, to restore him to this child of God, this initial design that he was. And I think that's a huge piece of the story, that the symbolism here is rich. And then Jesus responds to him in a very specific way. He says the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost. All right, and so looking at the word lost here, and I know some of you make fun of me. My Greek pronunciation isn't always amazing, but the word here that is used is apollolos, right? And so what that word means, it means a couple different things, but it can mean to destroy, so similar to that verbiage that we would hear in Exodus 22. And it can also mean to perish or to lose, to literally or metaphorically lose something or to be lost, right? It takes on a few meanings. And I'll admit that this verse tends to lean towards the idea of being lost and then being found. But isn't it interesting that it also kind of promotes that connotation of something that's destroyed? And so whenever Zacchaeus is sitting there saying, I'm going to make up for the terrible thing that I've been, I'm going to get that out of my life and be this new creation. And then Jesus comes back saying that the Son of Man came to seek out that which was lost / destroyed. I think this story kind of comes together beautifully. This idea of Zacchaeus being this new creation, distancing himself from the thing that he was, and through the power of Jesus Christ, being new. And so it's kind of interesting because these stories that we hear and that we tell, they stick to us for different reasons. Again, whenever I was a kid listening to this story, it stuck with me because I liked that a guy climbed a tree. I was a climber too. I was a mischievous little kid who liked to run and climb things. And so the story stuck with me. But now that I'm an adult, it sticks with me because it has this beautiful image of restoration. It has this beautiful depiction of a character who was down, feeling destroyed, in desperate need of restoration, who encounters Jesus and is able to experience that, is able to experience somewhat of a revival because of the power of Christ. And so I love this because I think that it's so relevant to a lot of us right now. I think that during all this craziness of COVID and during all this trying to transition back to a new normal, if you will, trying to figure all this out, it's really easy to feel dead inside. It's really easy to feel like you've been strung out for way too long. And, it kind of feels that way. Doesn't it kind of feel like people are more on edge than they were? Doesn't it kind of feel like people seem angrier and that things are not, I hate to say peaceful, but that things just aren't the way they feel like they should be, right? And maybe you are someone who is feeling defeated, feeling dead inside, and you're so desperate for this idea of restoration, this idea of, again, it's kind of a revival in your faith, that stories like this can be helpful, that remembering that through the power of Jesus Christ, we can experience that peace and joy again. I don't know, I think stories like this take on a whole new meaning depending on the season that we're in. And so if you have found that during this time, or even in the last few months, that you are feeling strung out, or are feeling like that you're just not in that place that you should be, I'm going to say a couple things. One, that happens, right? You'll hear pastors use the term hills and valleys. We all go through phases of ups and downs where things are great and things are not great. And maybe this is a prolonged down. Maybe it's a prolonged valley that you feel like we're in. But let me just be that word of encouragement that Jesus is the one who is able to get us out of that. Much like Zacchaeus was able to be restored and revived and renew his faith in God, I think that we're able to as well. I think that while our circumstances look different, everyone approaches their emotions and feelings from a unique place. I still think that Jesus, in the middle of all of that, is able to pierce our hearts and give us the joy that we so desperately need. And so maybe this is yet again a story that you've heard before. Again, we talked about in the beginning that we're used to going to church and hearing these stories, and to an extent we can expect what we're going to hear, and we can expect the outcome. But I would also argue that even in the middle of that, sometimes we need a reminder. Sometimes we need to hear someone say that Jesus is there in our lives. able to pull us out of these dark places. Maybe we need to hear that more often, because that's what we believe as Christians. And one of the things that we're called to do as Christians is to be that light in the world. And so, yes, maybe people feel like they're more on edge. Maybe people are more angry than normal, and we are in desperate need of experiencing Christ again. Let us be that light. Let us continue to be transformed, to distance ourselves from that old, awful thing that maybe some of us used to be, and live into the ministry that Jesus has taught us to live by. And so that's my prayer for all of you. It's very much a keep fighting the good fight. If you are in a place that doesn't feel right, just remember that Christ is there trying to pull you out. And as always, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to anyone at Cahill or Grace. We'd love to speak with you. But recognizing also that, yes, this is a journey. Yes, we have highs and lows. But continue pursuing Christ each and every day, because we believe that is the way to joy, that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And so that is my prayer for all of you today. And so I'm going to go ahead and close us in prayer, but in the spirit of hearing stories, in the spirit of saying things that many of us know, at the end of my prayer, I am going to offer up the Lord's Prayer, and I would encourage all of you to say that with me, to join together as we celebrate the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. And so let's go ahead and say a quick prayer. Gracious and holy God, again, we are so thankful for the opportunity to worship you, to come together wherever we are, whether we're used to Cahill's worship, Grace's worship, or whether we're new or visiting. We are just so thankful for this time. We ask that if any of us are feeling like we're in a dark place, that you give us revival, that you ignite your spirit in us again so that we can continue pursuing you and spreading the ministry of Jesus Christ every single day. And we lift all of this up now in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who taught us to pray these words. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Go in peace. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate all the love and support that you all continue to give this church. Now, we are able to do the mission that we feel called to do in this world because of your generosity. And so if you feel led to give at this time, there are two different ways that we would encourage you to do so. One, we have a PayPal account, and our official handle is @CahillUMC. Or on PayPal, you can search the email address cahillunitedmethodistchurch@gmail.com. Or you can send your checks in the mail to 8501 East FM 917, Alvarado, Texas 76009. Thank you all so much for everything you continue to do in this community.